So welcome to our panel today, where we will discuss cyber resilience initiatives in different jurisdictions. Thank you for being here. My name is Chander, Jethwani, and I'm the lead for cyber resiliency at Payments Canada. With us today, we have a fantastic panel from 3 different countries representing different jurisdictions. Joining us from the US, we have David Rossmann, SVP and Chief Information Security Officer at the Clearinghouse. From across the pond in the UK, we have Padovani, Cyber Strategy Lead for the Prudential Regulation Authority at the Bank of England. Closer to home, from the Great White North, also known as Canada, we have Jeremy Hutchinson, Program Delivery Lead for the Resilience of Wholesale Payment System at the Bank of Canada. I'm sure our audience would like to hear a little more about each of you, so I'm going to invite you to share about your role in cyber resilience initiatives when we get to our questions. But first, I'd like to set some context for our audience and highlight why we have chosen this topic today. It's no secret that we're living in times of escalating geopolitical tensions and an elevated threat landscape for cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, including national financial systems. Cyber resilience is about ensuring that we continuously develop and enhance our capabilities and capacity to provide and sustain critical financial services to our citizens and customers, even in the face of escalating and increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks that make the probability of a major disruption even greater. In our panel discussion, we will explore initiatives in place and challenges faced when mitigating cyber risks to the financial sector in global jurisdictions. Let us discover how leaders are moving beyond preventing cyber incidents and working towards actively responding, recovering, and learning from them. Just a reminder again, you can put your questions and ask the speaker, and you can vote them up, and we'll try and cover as many as we can when we get to the end. But to get us started, here is my first question for our panelists. What cyber resilience initiatives are underway or planned in your jurisdiction? As we go around the virtual table to hear from each panel member, I'm going to request you to take a brief moment to share a little bit more about yourself with our audience. So we'll go over first to the UK and hear from Gianna at the Bank of England.
Thanks, Chander, and good morning, everyone. I'm Gianandrea Padovani, Cyber Strategy Lead at the Prudential Regulation Authority. About my role, I lead a team whose mission is supporting the supervisory teams at the PRA with the oversight of cyber risk. So we lead cyber assessments, but also we collaborate with many other colleagues in the policy department and other units at the PRA to build the resilience of the sector. Chander, do you want me already to answer to your question, or do you want to go to the other panelists?
Oh yeah, but please go ahead with responding to the question.
Thank you. Sorry to ask. I think so. About your question, Chander, it's a very good question. So the operational resilience and cyber resilience of the UK financial sector is a top priority for our organization. And let's say we see cyber attacks are a major threat for the operational resilience, not only of the sector, but of each single financial institution. As a regulator, we have a very particular perspective to talk about cyber resilience. So for us, it's not only understanding cyber threats, but especially understand the vulnerabilities that we could control directly with our engagement, supervisory engagement, and help the financial institution to prepare better for it, but also in terms of response and recover, to build those type of capabilities that are a key for being resilient. So in this context, we keep developing our approach and we keep building different initiatives. I said not only to prevent, but to build the resilience, focusing mainly on respond and recovery, assuming failure of the preventative controls. It's very hard for me to provide a full coverage of these type of initiatives and planning that we support, but I'll try to provide you with a good summary of the main activities. Let me mention what we call the operational resilience policy that was published by the PRA last year. This policy is very important for us because it captures our approach to deliver operational resilience to the sector. This policy basically asks our sector to identify what really matters, so what we call the important business services, but also we asked the sector to understand the underpinning assets and also ask them to self-assess themselves against what we call the impact tolerances for these important business services. Basically, we are asking them to identify, the breaking point when cyber attack, different type of scenarios, but in particular cyber attacks will occur, and build their confidence to be ready to respond and recovery in that sense. Very quickly, other three main point and programs initiatives. One is a CBEST, threat-led penetration testing. We are leading a sectorial program where we work with our firms in terms of identify critical scenarios, cyber attack scenarios, and assess with the CBEST accredited providers the preventative measures and the ability of the financial institution to detect these attacks. Another type of initiatives, which is out of the supervisory remit, but is more on what we call the collaborative action. So we collaborate with and we facilitate these activities is a CMEC, which is part of our exercising program. So back to the point, coordination communication during an incident, during the response of an incident is very important from our perspective. So we sponsor this type of initiatives and bring the sector together to verify to what extent they are prepared and to what extent the assumptions that they are making are valid. In the end, the last point, I said there are other type of regulatory assessment with different scope. I think let me mention what we call the cyber stress test, which again, high focus on response and recovery, but more from a macro prudential perspective. So with cyber stress test, we are quite keen to bring to attention what we call the severe but plausible scenarios to the attention of the firms, and build with them the understanding of what a good response look like. Again, focusing on a more granular aspect and more broader scope than the simple exercising. I just stop here, Chander, and over back to you.
Great, thank you, Gianna. I heard some very key things you said there. You said assume failure, and that you have a policy and you have a CBEST framework. And it seems like the focus is really shifting from prevention to recovery and response in your jurisdiction.
You are absolutely right, Chander, and that's exactly the a mindset shift. Exactly. So I think since the beginning, prevention has been always a key priority in the industry, in the security community. To some extent, we are aware that the complexity and the dynamic of the cyber threat, and also I would say the digital environments that we see in the financial sector is very complex to prevent at 100%. So assuming failure, it's a very good shift in mentality to be ready when a cyber attack will strike.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great to hear from the UK. We'll continue with the central bank themes and move over to our next central bank. Over to Jeremy at the Bank of Canada.
Hey, thank you, Chander, and good morning, everybody. My name is Jeremy Hutchinson. I've been working at the Bank of Canada for close to 14 years, and in the last 4 years in the cybersecurity division. My current role, I am the Program Delivery Office Lead for the Resilience of the Wholesale Payment System Program. That is a bit of a mouthful, so going forward, I'm just going to call it RWPS for all of our sakes. Before I get it, it's a really cool program. It's a public private-public partnership with the Bank of Canada, Payments Canada, the operator of the wholesale payment system, and this is Canada's six largest banks, or the systemically important banks. It's a non-regulated program. It's a collaborative program, and the sort of the genesis, the catalyst is it's a kind of an interesting story. In 2017, the governor of the Bank of Canada and the CEOs of the six largest banks, they meet on a biannual basis to talk about the hot topics, the trends going on in the financial business sector or the banking sector. And they asked the question to the group, what keeps you up at night? And everybody came back and said, if there's a cyber event in the wholesale payment system. And maybe for the audience here, I'll just describe the wholesale payment system. So the system is called Lynx currently, before it's called LVTS. And it's a Canadian electronic funds transfer system that settles large value and time critical Canadian dollar payments. So it's really a systems of systems. It's highly interconnected with many participants in it. It's complex. And just to kind of give you a sense of the daily transactions and value within it, on any given day, there's roughly about 49,000 transactions, with an average daily value of $490 billion. So, relatively low volume, high value, and it's one of the it's one of the backbones of the financial sector. So, based on this sort of the complex system, how important it is, we stood up the program in 2018, as I said, with the Bank of Canada, Payments Canada, and the six largest banks. The mandate is to enhance the collective cyber resilience of the wholesale payment system by increasing and exercising the ecosystems, prevention, detection, coordination, and response and recovery capabilities. And as we set up the program, and it became evident that a lot of the organizations individually, they had a high level of cyber maturity within each organization. But given to the nature of this system and the interconnectivity of it, is that if there's ever a cyber event, we needed to be able to work together to recover. So this program is about as a collaborative way and to increase the overall cyber resilience of the system. I'll pause there and I'll pass it back to you, Chander.
Thank you, Jeremy. Sounds really interesting. Lots of collaboration, large banks, big values, and big money, and enhancement is what I heard from Canada. Just a quick public service announcement before we move over to the US. So it seems that some audience members might be having difficulty either seeing or hearing us. So I request you to refresh your browser. And if you are using a VPN, try and log out of your VPN. So hopefully that should make it better, and you'll be able to see a wonderful panel and hear us and follow along as well. So we've heard from two central banks, and now to get a different perspective, let's hear from David at the Clearinghouse in the US.
Yeah, thank you, Chander. So David Rossmann, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Clearinghouse here in the United States. So I've been the Chief Information Security Officer here for about 5 years. My role is really everything under the umbrella of information security. I manage information security risk. We have, the day-to-day information security that you would traditionally have from a security team, monitoring threats, monitoring incident response, insider threat. We do architecture, we do cloud security. So really the full gamut of what you'd expect from an information security team. Prior to joining the Clearinghouse, I was actually with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York for 6 years. So I've worked on both sides of the central bank side as well as now on at the Clearinghouse. So the Clearinghouse is the operator of CHIPS, which makes us critical infrastructure for U.S. payments. We transact approximately $2 trillion a day in movement between the banks. We also now operate the real-time payments network throughout the United States. So that's something that we only launched a few years ago, and it's really revolutionized how payments move within the U.S. and now moving towards more of a real-time state. From a cyber resilience perspective, my role is really to be SME, helping design and build the resilience throughout the organization. In regards to this question, what I'm going to speak about is a bit of the interaction we have throughout the industry and throughout the United States with government partners, as well as our other critical infrastructure partners and the large banks. So like I said, we are not a regulator, we are an operator of critical infrastructure. I think the biggest change that I've seen in my years of leading information security teams is the amount of information that we're sharing. That we are sharing across the industry. If you told me 8 to 10 years ago that I'd be sharing information about my network, whether it's the technology stack, what I have on my perimeter, vulnerability information, there is no way I would have shared that 10 years ago. That just was not how we operated. But that has changed because of cyber resiliency. What the industry is looking at now, I believe, is really trying to get centralized repositories so that our partners in government, and for us, it's Treasury, it's Department of Homeland Security, it's CISA, which is Cybersecurity and Information and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is part of DHS. They're now centralizing a lot of this information, and we're all sharing it so that if there is a vulnerability or there is an issue that impacts one or more of the financial services critical infrastructure partners, we're able to get that information across to the other organizations in a much more timely and efficient manner. And these centralized agencies are really helping with that. They're also doing a lot more exercises in the industry. A couple that I'll point to is CISA runs Cyberstorm, which they've done, I believe it's like 8 of them by now. And there's been 8 different cyberstorms where we're as an entire financial industry, we are working together to look at these exercises and doing our best to try and communicate and coordinate. SIFMA runs their Quantum Dawn, which is another very important exercise. Treasury, Physic, FSISAC have all come together, and they do one-day exercises called their Hamilton exercises. There's a lot more. I just wanted to highlight a few of them. And one last point I'll make before I send it back to you, Chander, is there's also new requirements for us for cyber reporting. And I think it's really important to mention that here, that we as practitioners now have really tight cyber reporting requirements that we have to send into CISA if we do have a cyber issue with our infrastructure. So a lot more collaboration, a lot more sharing, and a lot more information being passed across the organizations to make sure that we as the full financial services operators are able to be more resilient. I'll talk a bit more about some of the stuff we're doing locally and some of the future questions, but I'll leave it there for now.
That's excellent, David. Thank you. It's wonderful to hear a different perspective from the operator side. And it does seem like there's lots of stakeholders. There's information sharing, which is a big deal. So it sounds like there's a movement and there's support to have transparency and active collaboration. And also heard a lot of exercises. I guess that's how we stay fit in the financial sector. So exercising is definitely good for our financial health. So this was really great. And, we heard about initiatives in different jurisdictions that are currently underway or some that have been planned at a high level. And I'd like to zoom in a little bit, if that's okay with our panelists, and request you to share about the areas of focus. So zooming in a bit more on these specific initiatives that you mentioned in response to the first question, in each of your jurisdictions, and what are the areas of focus and benefits that you're seeing as a result of the efforts that you're making along with your partners and the investments that are being made? It sounds like for several years now. So we're going to start at home base first and hear from Jeremy to get us started on this.
Thanks, Chander. I think I'm going to start off with a benefit right off the bat. By having the program in place, what it has done is it's created a community where we're able to reach out informally to our partners to talk to people about, get lessons learned, best practices, and just kind of breaking down the barriers between organizations. And I think that is one of the sort of implicit benefits from this. And I think it goes a long way, especially in the time during a response or coordination to recover. Having that awareness, having that familiarity with who's on the other side of the phone is really a tremendous benefit. Now, speaking more into some of the program work streams that we do, as I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of benchmarking. We do benchmarking with our prevention and detection controls. We do benchmarking with our recovery capabilities. And one of the things that we do with that is each organization sends back, what's their current maturity, what's their target maturity, when are we going to get there? And then when we get a chance to aggregate that, we get to see where the soft spots are in the industry, and we get to think about, what is the causes? Is there something that's across the industry that there's an issue? Is there something that's just unique to each organization? So the benchmarking has been really has been vital. And one thing which I can double click on a little bit further is within the data recovery. We're able to identify what the critical data is, and look at what are the steps or the capabilities to restore in a timely manner. And through that process, we identified a couple soft spots. One is, it's a challenge to segregate this information effectively, and it's also a challenge to to test and restore that. So as an industry, we said, okay, these are what we have to collectively work towards, and we share best practices on how we can do that. So that is a tremendous benefit. In addition, one of the work streams that we've been working on is being able to coordinate and respond. And within Canada, prior to the program, we did have an operational resilience group called JORM, the Joint Operational Resiliency Management Group. As through the program, we evolved the scope of the program to become the Canadian Financial Sector Resiliency Group. So greater participation, better representation across the financial sector. And then that sort of ties into the exercising. And Chander was mentioning this earlier, as was Dave and Gianna. The more you exercise, the better. It helps you, increase your muscle memory. If there's new groups being formed, as I mentioned, CFRG and evolution of that, it helps people get familiar with the procedures, the protocols, the roles and the responsibilities of that group. So just as I said, it just builds that muscle memory. And so it's just really everybody working together I think is a really important benefit from this, to understand, everybody's responsibility, what's their point of view, especially when you start to commingle public and private interest. So from the RWPS program, I think that is one of the greatest benefit is from everybody working together.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. I heard breaking down barriers and working together. And that's always a good thing. And I think we have a bit of a theme emerging. So for the audience, if you're wondering what are all these acronyms, you're welcome to throw that as a question as well. You would have figured we love acronyms. So with that said, we'll stay in North America, and we're going to shift to David to hear his perspective on the focus and benefits.
Sure. So first, I'll start picking up right where Jeremy left off, which is repetition. That to me is why we do this, and that's the first thing you have to ask yourself is why have these exercises, why build these scenarios, and it's about repetition. Right before we actually started this group was here, and we were talking about basketball, and what I like to think about in repetition is free throw shooting. I mean, you go out there, you just keep shooting those free throws, you do them over and over again, so that when it's time to get into the game, exactly, you have the feel, you have the exact touch, and you do it over and over again. And that same analogy can work here in this space, is keep doing it. Make sure that you are, exercising those muscles so that it is just really muscle memory and you have it down. I'm going to continue where I started in the last portion, which is, what has changed. I think what has changed most for me in cyber resiliency and the work that we've done in these exercises is we focus a lot more now, I think, on the qualitative side of the exercises versus the technical side. It used to be, and it still is very important to exercise the failover of your systems, or if there is a ransomware attack, how do you respond technically? But at least in my organization and in a lot of them that I've talked to, the technical response, because we all have issues, we all have some sort of whether it's an operational issue or a cyber issue, we exercise those more in our normal routine. What we don't necessarily exercise as much is the softer side of response. Who makes the phone calls, right? Who calls the executive? When you need your executives to get onto a phone bridge, right? Do they know what phone bridge they want to get onto specifically? What about escalation procedures? What if it's after hours, right? How does this all work? How do you actually engage with your third parties? Right? If you have a third party that you need to be involved in this and the person that manages that relationship is on vacation, right? Is that phone number in your incident response plan? And I think it's really important, especially for me in my exercises, to work through what I consider these qualitative sides as opposed to the hardcore technical aspects of an exercise. The next thing I think is really important is to ask the really difficult questions during your exercises. What if you have to knock a very key client or bank or participant off of your network because they're having a cyber issue? Do you know who in your organization has the authority to do that? Do you know how? Do you have a procedure? If these situations come into play, do you actually have you exercised that work? So asking those really tough questions, is incredibly important. If you need to reconnect them and they had a cyber issue, have you worked through what the steps are to reconnect an organization that had a cyber problem? What if there's a ransom going on in your organization? Have you talked about who can approve payment or who can approve the work to do that? So making sure you have the right contracts in place, making sure that you've asked yourself the really difficult questions. And the last thing I want to note on, my areas of focus on my exercises is to remember that the goal of an exercise is to make yourself better. It's not to be perfect. If you walk out of an exercise and you have no observations, then you didn't really run a strong exercise, because what you need to walk out of there is with some observations. And I like to call any issues or gaps or anything noted in an exercise as an observation as opposed to a finding, because it's an expected outcome from my exercises, because you're asking the difficult questions. You're asking yourselves to respond to a threat or a scenario that you have never responded to before. So how can you be perfectly prepared? That's the point of running these exercises. So hopefully you can do that. And then, remember the 3 stages of any exercise is you learn a lot from the preparation, which is when you're putting the exercise together, the execution, which is when you're having these tough conversations, and then the after action report, which is when you're pulling everything together, documenting what you've done, and then putting together what the next steps are from the observations from the exercise.
That's great, David. Thank you. So practice basketball and ask difficult questions. So I think those are really key themes to remember. So we've heard from North America. Would love to hear what's happening in the United Kingdom as well. So Gianna, over to you.
Thanks, Chander. I probably will repeat some of the elements that Jeremy and David present, but I think a key element to mention is exactly the culture. So I think from a regulatory perspective, what we are trying to lead with the new operational resilience policy and also program like CBEST is, a shift in the culture and how to think about cyber resilience, or more broadly operational resilience. So what I'm saying is that, for example, also the policy that we published last year is not just a simple checklist of activities that financial institutions have to run about and tick 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 the box, done, I'm resilient, because we really think that doesn't work for all the financial institutions. I said maybe there is a baseline that need to be met, but resilient is much more than that. Is more understanding exactly how you go about identifying the issue, how you go preventing, protecting, responding, and the recovery from the major disruptions. So to some extent, there is not one solution for all the financial institutions and all the businesses that are linked to that. So it's a bit philosophical, but I think it's a common theme that also was captured by Jeremy and David in their presentation, and we are fully aligned to that. Also, another example about CBEST, it is a threat-led penetration assessment, and it is part of our supervisory approach. However, what we always tell the financial institution is that do not to take the right interpretation of that exercise. It's not a pass or fail exam. It's not said a pure checklist exercise or a pure compliance exercise. CBEST is a very complex process, threat-led penetration testing, that provide a lot of benefit if run with the right attitude and mindset. So CBEST will tell you what are the most critical scenarios, cyber attacks relevant for that specific type of institution. And at the same time, I said the outcome of CBEST is to identify weaknesses in the detection and the initial response capability, and also in the security posture for those scenarios. So back to David's point, I think if the financial institutions run that with with a closed approach or trying to find the easy way to that, probably you will end up with no findings. But maybe that's not a great outcome from a resilience perspective, because I said it's a continuous learning, continuous assessment, continuous improvement, and the role of the regulators, I think, is more to raise the bar also, and the importance of this type of assessment. So that's mainly on the interpretation of our operational resilience policy and programs like CBEST that we run from a supervisory perspective. I think I would touch also a bit more on what we call collective action approach, which includes, as I said, exercising, but also many coordination groups, which touch back to the info sharing point also. So we act as a catalyst for the sector to help financial institutions to talk to each other, to share best practices around different topics, but also intervene in collaboration with our National Cybersecurity Center. So a lot of benefit in that area as well, to create some dynamic that could trigger a useful discussion, useful sharing of information, and also as a discussion between the financial institution to find the right solution for their specific issue, rather than having, as I said, one solution pushed by the regulator to be applied with, which, as I said, could be useful in some cases, but maybe for the resilience of the sector, it should be a balance between the two approaches. Last but not least, I think always from an engagement perspective, I think we collaborate a lot, not only at national level with other authorities within the UK. So I mentioned National Cybersecurity Center, but also there is another financial authority, which is the FCA, that we collaborate very closely with, but also at international level. So a good example in that case is the cross-jurisdictional assessment that we run with other jurisdiction. For example, CBEST, we have an agreement with the European Central Bank at the moment to run CBEST and TIBER in a joint manner. So I think that's another example where we recognize that cyber is not only a national issue, which is close to a single jurisdiction, but it should be tackled at the global level and find new synergies also across jurisdiction for this type of collaboration. I stop here, Chander. I said also, I think Jeremy and David mentioned many other points, but I would not repeat what they already said, and I hand over back to you.
Great, thank you. So it seems like there's definitely a lot of commonalities in the different jurisdictions. I hear you say also the opportunities for collaboration, not just within your own jurisdiction, but cross jurisdiction as well. So thank you for highlighting that, Kiana. And I think a key theme we heard from everyone, all the panelists, is it's not a tick the box exercise. The goal is to learn from what we're doing here. So again, great similarities as well on the importance. Just watching the time here as well, and I know it's not as easy as you wonderful folks make it look, because your teams are doing this and you're doing this while keeping the proverbial lights on. That is, your financial systems and your day-to-day business has to keep on operating. And on top of that, you're doing these initiatives to exercise, stay fit, make sure that you're collaborating with all these stakeholders, internal, external, and even across jurisdictions. So I'm going to dive into ask you pretty candidly, what are the challenges that you actually face as you take on these initiatives? And also, what are your planned next steps from here on to further improve and continuously enhance these initiatives? I also realize that these are sensitive topics, so please feel free to share only as much as you feel comfortable. And David, this time I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Chander. So, as a practitioner, right, I mean, my first goal is to keep us as, safe and secure as possible, right? The confidentiality, integrity, availability of all TCH systems, applications, data is my number one priority. So the real challenge, the one that I'll dive into for a minute or two here, is the evolving threat landscape. The threats change, and trying to build a resilient program based on an industry and a threat that changes on a daily basis has been a challenge. As Gianna mentioned earlier, Gianna uses the term severe yet plausible. We use the extreme yet plausible. So same concept, but it's what we build these scenarios based on extreme yet plausible scenarios. If something is actually plausible, not extreme, we really work hard to fix it because that's not a scenario that we need to have ourselves in. But what we do is we have a risk register full with scenarios. And as the threat landscape evolves and changes, we periodically have to review it. Did the likelihood and impact increase? Did it reduce? Did it stay the same as an original scenario creation? For example, in the last year and a half, things like supply chain or ransomware might have gone up based on some of the things going on in the industry and the threat, where maybe new technology you've put in, if you've shifted from, say, workstations to VDI or password to multi-factor, then maybe some of the scenario possibilities and probabilities have gone down. So keeping an updated evaluation of the severity, response, and likelihood based on factors that have changed within your organization, but also external factors such as the threat, is incredibly, incredibly important. Also, one other point that I'd make is all these issues that happen, at least from our perspective, they're all learning experiences. So every vulnerability that's out there and every major breach that hits the front page of the newspaper, they're things that we need to learn from. So we do an evaluation of all the major breaches, all the major vulnerabilities, and think about how we can adapt our resiliency based on what another company's experiencing, right? So for example, going back a little in time when Sony had their issue a number of years ago, that changed the way we all thought about desktops and laptops. What if I lost 50% of all my desktops and laptops? That ushered in the VDI era, right? With Target, right? When Target got hit, that was about HVAC systems. So now you started thinking, wait, it's not just my normal networking infrastructure. What else is connected? Internet of Things, what is there? And then, thinking a little bit more recently, some of the things in the last year and a half that we've had to respond to, I already mentioned supply chain with SolarWinds, ransomware, Log4j being something that was in everyone's network, a completely ubiquitous piece of technology that we all had to respond to. And then, of course, pandemic, work from home, so people's habits changed. So it wasn't just technology and the threat that was out there, but your own staff habits had to change with a shift in the workforce. So we had to run more phishing tests. We had to, work on harder, training around spear phishing and phishing. So really the biggest, just wrapping it up here, Chander, the challenge that I face is how to handle an evolving threat landscape, an evolving workforce, and an evolving technology within my organization, merging all of those together to build the most resilient system that we possibly can.
That's great, David. Thank you. That definitely sounds complex with the goals to have continuous assessment and also learning from others and keep improving. Thank you for sharing that. We are going to go to Guyana, and I'm going to ask, what's the one thing that you'd like to add to that in terms of challenges that you're seeing in the UK?
Yeah, I think David covered the threat aspect of the cyber risk. So I go more on the vulnerability side and how to assess that. So in terms of challenge there, I still think that getting the basic right is still important. So fixing cyber hygiene issues, focusing on some usual thing like, stopping the privilege escalation, the lateral movement in your network. It was mentioned phishing, etc. But focusing exactly on those key controls that are still defined as cyber hygiene, but to some extent are still causing, the success of cyber attacks is very important from my perspective. Just a comment about how to go about simulating high capable attacker. I think that's another challenge that we have. So to some extent, I think current type of testing, especially on threat-led penetration testing, so more on the prevention side, I think struggle to be comparable to, potential national state or organized crime that, a real attacker have a lot of time to plan and execute their attack strategy, while to some extent, I said, financial institution and tester are always working in a constrained environment in terms of time, in terms of commercials, and in terms of ethical. So what we can really assess via this type of testing, is not all what a real attacker would try to do to disrupt important business services. I just stop here, conscious time, and back to you, Chander.
Great, thank you, Guyana. So the US spoke about threats, UK spoke about vulnerabilities. Jeremy, in Canada, what's the one thing that you'd like to add to challenges you're seeing?
Well, the challenge I have is following these guys up because they leave the cupboard bare for discussion. But I think maybe the one thing I'd like to add quickly is, I think exercising is really key, and we're getting a good understanding of exercising within a smaller community. But we know that a cyber event is not limited to borders. It's not limited to financial sector. It has a wide-ranging impact. So I think the challenge going forward is to expand the exercises to be cross-sectorial, cross-jurisdictional, and just understand how that coordination happens between sectors, between nations. And that's very difficult to set up, very difficult to plan, very difficult to execute. But I think that is the next challenge that's going to, for the groups and for the jurisdictions.
Oh, you love raising the bar, Jeremy. So you are calling for collaboration across the jurisdictions. We're seeing 3 jurisdictions here, and I'm sure there's other jurisdictions that are hearing us. So I guess it's an open call for collaboration to improve our cyber resilience across all jurisdictions. This has been a fantastic discussion, and I do want to thank all the panelists for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you. And thanks again, everyone who attended, for your time and for joining us today. Stay resilient and enjoy the rest of the summit.